Not so much.
All right, so let's get started. I think probably by now you know the two of us. My name is Zach Geis. This is Kyle Massey. Our information, Twitter handles, emails, and many personal details are available on the page in front of you. Let's go ahead and move forward. Welcome to the initiative. We always cover this every time. Go forward again. Our goal with this program is to teach others to code with the Tableau APIs, develop tools for fostering a safe and friendly environment for users of all skill levels. Continue. We're still in part one. As you are aware, we're in the REST API. We are, as I mentioned, go to the next slide, part 4 or session 4 of 5. So today we're really going to expand on what we've talked about in the past. A lot of the other sessions, the first 3 were kind of in preparation for where we're going to be here in part 4 and 5, session 4 and 5, whatever we want to call it. We're going to spend a lot of time with the actual APIs today. We're going to talk about the Tableau Server Client Library that we've been talking about and readying you up for over the past. So lots of cool stuff going on today and in 2 weeks where we really get into the weeds with the API. Let's go ahead and move forward. Couple reminders, no real new announcements, just reminders for this. All of the code that Kyle's going to share is on his GitHub page. That information can be found right there. It's also on the datatheories.com website, so you can find the links to the GitHub page from there directly. Next page. Just a reminder that there is the Trailblazer DX. This is the conference for basically all of Salesforce, but there is a whole pocket of it focused on Tableau developer experience, the APIs. I know a lot of folks from Tableau are going to be there, and there's a lot of opportunities to get a very highly discounted rate to the conference if you're interested. So if you are, you want to chat with me or Kyle, we can hook you up and talk to Tableau, make a connection there, and get you to the conference. Let's go ahead and next page. Just a reminder, keep updated on the datatheories.com website. Datatheories.com/Tableau coders will take you directly to the page. We keep the events, a little blurb about them, the slides, the GitHub code, and most importantly, the recording of the video where you can see Kyle and I jab at each other for an hour, over the course of 5 separate sessions once this is all said and done. Go ahead to the next page. Reminder that you can join us on Slack. We do have a growing community out there, and it's good to get on there. That's where you can chat with us between sessions, ask questions, and get to know some other folks who have been part of the initiative. All right, let's code. So I'm actually going to pass this over to Kyle. Kyle is going to be doing most of everything today, which could be a good thing. It could be, I don't know. I'm kind of in the same boat as you guys because I haven't seen this. So, a lot of pressure here on Kyle to do this right, to do this, professionally, perfectly. It's we're rolling the dice right now, folks. So Kyle, the floor is yours.
Thank you for that stunning vote of confidence, Zach. I'm really excited. No, I'm kidding. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. As Zach said, today we are going to jump straight into some coding. And I do want to call out, today's a lot. We have a lot to go over between today and 2 weeks from now. I want to switch up the format a little bit from how we've done this in prior sessions, where we kind of wait till the end to do all of our Q&A. What I'm sharing right now is the repo that I created for sessions 4 and 5, and I'm just going to kind of go through these in order and talk through the content. But I'm going to pause after each one and collect some questions if you guys have any questions. So Zach's going to keep an eye on those. As we go through the individual ones, go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit those questions. And then, like I said, at the end of each module, we'll try to address those instead of waiting till the end, because these are kind of sequential. It'll make sense to build these up as we go. So what are we starting with today? So for session 4 and 5, I really want us to start building a toolbox you can think of using the server client. And we're going to start looking at some more real world examples of how you can use the REST API, or moving forward, we will prefer the Tableau server client, the TSC. There is a README in each section. If you're not familiar with how GitHub works, as you go into each one of these folders, you'll see this README that'll kind of give you a hint of what each section is going to cover. I would definitely make sure and read those. There's some important information in each one. They also kind of give you a little bit of a clue on where to go when you're getting started. Give me 1 second here to switch screens. It's being a little bit annoying. Okay. So in the first section, I'm going to introduce you to TSC and kind of talk about what it is. Then we're going to move into some getting and filtering examples, and moving on, we're going to loop through some actions. And I said automate the boring stuff here because we're going to just refresh a list of extracts from a CSV. So this could be a common use case where someone hands you a list of data sources or workbooks that didn't refresh properly and they want you to refresh them again. This is an easy way. We'll show you an easy way to handle that. We'll talk about some publishing of workbooks and data sources, and also a sneak peek at another library offered by Tableau called the Tableau Document API. And then at the end, which we may not get to today, but when we get through all of this, we will actually stand up a project, a server group, give that group permissions, add a user to the group, publish a workbook, and refresh it all at the same time. Kind of a real world example of like standing up a new project in sort of a simulated business environment. So with that being said, let's jump straight into introducing the TSC. So in the README here, up until now, we've talked a lot about the REST API. And the reason why we started with that is it's kind of important to understand the fundamentals of what's going on in an HTTP API. And it makes it a little bit easier to talk about some Python fundamentals to kind of abstract that away from just the TSC. But what is the TSC? So the Tableau Server Client, which we'll refer to as TSC, is essentially, you can think of it as like a bridge between Python and the REST API. What it really does is take a Pythonic, which is a word that Zach gave me crud for the other day, a Pythonic approach to things that in their nature are not necessarily what we like to see in Python, such as big, long XML bodies, big, long JSON objects. And essentially, if you Google Pythonic, essentially the definition is things should be easy to read. They should do one thing at a time. Sparse is better than dense. Long is better than too short. It's basically just Python strives to be readable. That's one of the #1 goals of Python as a language. So when you start throwing in big, long chunks of things, which we'll see when we get into the example, it's really hard to zero in on what you need to change. If you're changing somebody else's code or if you have a bug, it makes it a lot harder to find those types of things. One thing that's really important to call out from the beginning is that there is not 100% parity in features between the REST API and TSC. It's probably, I'm making up this number, but I would guess it's somewhere in the 90 to 95% range. But there are some strange things. For example, you can't just filter a project directly by its LUID in the TSC. And if you're not familiar with LUID in the Tableau world, it's a unique identifier that's stored if you've ever gone into the Postgres database for your Tableau server. It's those long unique identifiers. So you can't just search like that for a project, but you can for a workbook or a data source. So there's some little things you have to learn about the differences between TSC and the REST API. But like I said here at the bottom, the too long didn't read is, in my opinion, TSC is so much easier to read. It's so much more Pythonic, and you don't have to memorize a bunch of request bodies and things like that, or store them in another file, that it's worth it. Even if you have to maybe take an extra step or two, it's, in my opinion, it's worth it to be comfortable with the TSC, especially, if you're going to write your whole application in Python. So how do we get started with the TSC? So the TSC is available from pip, which I think we've covered before, which is just the package manager for Python. And you can install it by pip install Tableau client. That's all. That'll get you the latest version. I want to say the latest updates to this were earlier this year or end of last year. So Tableau, they are actively maintaining this library as well. I wrote here, be sure to create a virtual environment, which we covered before. If you want to look through some of the other folders, you'll see an example of that. And then how do we import it? So you'll see most every example, if you Google things about the TSC, is imported this way. So using this as alias and then giving it the alias TSC. You don't have to do it that way, but that is how you'll see examples if you're looking to compare what you've done or you're stuck. But real quick, I also want to give you kind of a visual representation of what's different here. So let's compare how the REST API works versus what's going on in Python with the TSC. So as we've seen in prior sessions, sorry, my nose is really itchy today. As we've seen in prior sessions, every time we start doing something with the REST API, the first thing we need to do is sign in. So I'm showing here the sign-in process. We're creating a post that we send to Tableau server, and it sends us back a response that we use moving forward as the X Tableau authorization header. It's that token that we got. That's basically Tableau server saying, you told me you were going to do some stuff. Here's your token that'll let you do that stuff. And so once we have that token, we start creating additional requests that include the token. We send it to the server. It sends us a response. And then we might make a subsequent request where we still include this auth token and something we got from this response. And we just kind of repeat that, ad infinitum as many times as we need to do what we want to do with the REST API. And that's all well and good. But remember, your connection to a REST API, to an HTTP API is done every time you send a request and it responds. On the flip side, with the TSC, we don't need to make a totally separate call to sign in. We don't need to save a request body. We don't need to worry about signing out or anything like that. We get with the TSC, we get these personal access token, auth, and server. The first two examples there. This is where I'm setting up. This is how I'm going to sign in, and this is where I'm going to sign in. And if you look at the next example, where it starts on line 11 with server.auth.signin, this is a very common setup in Python, a very common command in Python called a context manager. And what that means essentially is it's something that when you see this with keyword, something will happen as soon as you enter the context manager. So after line 11, everything that's at that level of indentation, as soon as I get there, something will happen. And as soon as I exit that level of indentation, something else will happen. In this case, that's the TSC taking care of signing me in and signing me out. So I could, in my example in the middle, do as many things as I want on the same site between lines 11 and whenever I decide I'm done. And as soon as I exit that, so go out a level of indentation, then the TSC will sign me out. I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to worry about passing the same token over and over again. TSC takes care of it for me as long as I'm inside of that, as long as I am inside of that with Context Manager. The last example here, I'm just saying, once I pull down a workbook or set a workbook to a variable here using this filter on line 14, then I can continue to refer to that by its variable name. I don't need to get its LUID and keep sending it back to the REST API like I would with those types of calls. So let's jump in and look at some more examples here. But what I think we're going to notice right away is that our code is a lot shorter when we use TSC. And not only is it shorter, it's a lot easier to read. So I'm going to flip over in here, and I highly encourage, so in the folders for this session and for these two upcoming sessions, there are REST API examples and TSC examples for most things. I recommend looking at them side by side, at least at first, so you can get a better sense of the differences. So if I look at here, this is just a very basic sign-in example. And so on the left, you can see here, I have to have a request body first. So my first function is just subbing in, some constants for my personal access token and my secret and my site name. And these are all things that I've just put into another file, so I don't have to, you don't get to see them. But your sign-in request will always look like this for the REST API. And so then I'm actually sending my post with this sign-in request to my server and the appropriate API version cetera, et cetera. And then, so this response gives me a response in XML that gives me, it's kind of, I'll just print it here. I'll show you guys. So I'm in this. Okay, so when I get this, I get a whole bunch of XML. Let me pull this over. Oh wait, you guys can see that. It zooms on top of it for me. There we go. Okay, so you can see here, I get a response that has several things in it that I want. It has this token. It has my site ID. If I wanted it, it has my user, my ID as a user. So I need these two little helper functions here to help me pull out the token and the site LUID from this response. Again, one of the goals in Python should always be that your functions and methods do one thing. So you could write this as one big long monster function, but then you lose clarity of what's happening in each step. So if you look at this get workbooks function on line 50, starting on line 50, you can see how I've combined this all together to make essentially one call to the REST API to get a list of workbooks. So if I do this, you can see first I'm doing my sign in, I'm parsing out the token and the site LUID. I'm telling my request headers to include the token. I send the request, and then I return the content. So all of that strung together gets me this, which is a big long list of XML, or a big long chunk of XML with details about every workbook on this site. Now let's flip over to the right-hand side. This right-hand side does exactly the same thing, but it's about 10 lines instead of 70. So if you look over here, I'm saying every TSC call you'll see it starts with this tab auth and server. And again, this is just kind of a common naming convention that you'll see in the community. It's not necessarily required that you call them these things, but if you want to, match with examples you're finding on the internet, this is pretty standard. So I'm just passing it my personal authorization token name, my pat secret, my site name, giving it some information about where the server is located. And this use server version equals true line for TSC is just saying use the version of the API that the server has. If you want to specify a specific version, you can. Some things do change from version to version. But for the examples in this course, I always am going to have this set to true. So starting on line 17, yeah.
Sorry, there's a request to make it a little bit larger. Maybe we could just
I can make it bigger. I can zoom in a little more. Let's see. Is that better?
Not outrageously better.
I can bump it up once more.
All right, they're saying it is better. So
they're saying that's better. Okay.
My opinion does not matter.
Well, that's for sure. That's for certain. Okay. So jerk. Anyway, starting, you can see here on line 17, here's this with context manager that I was talking about, which means, hey, I'm going to sign in and I'm going to do some stuff. And so I'm doing this. And on line 18, I can call just server.workbooks.get. I don't need to construct some long URL that contains some unique identifier for the site. It already knows what site I'm signed into, and I just say sites.get. We'll talk a little bit more about what this paginator item is in the next section, I believe. But for now, just know that this returns two sets of, or a set of two things, a list of workbooks and an item that helps you with if you have multiple pages of results. So if I run this, I am going to get, in this case, I get a list of, you see here, Tableau server client.models.workbook item. So this is a list of the same workbooks that I got in XML as TSC workbook items. We'll get into that in a little more in depth as well. But essentially, these are the TSC has taken the REST API responses and turned the individual workbooks here into Pythonic class items. And what that means is we can interact with them like you would with anything native to Python, and not have to, manipulate XML, JSON, et cetera, et cetera. So again, the purpose of this module here was just to show you how much less effort goes into doing the same action with the TSC in about 10 lines, including comments, versus about 70 with the REST API. All right, so I will pause there. I see there's at least one question. So what questions do we have, Zach?
Yeah, so the question that we've got right now, there are two things. So I'll answer one real quick. The last session, I couldn't attend when the recording is available on your website. The part 3 was just made available on YouTube yesterday. So by end of day today, we'll make sure that that's updated on the Tableau on the website for Data Theories. And then the question more for you, Kyle, is from Callie. If I plan to run the Python script on a schedule and it is in a virtual environment, how to run the script using Task Scheduler?
Ooh, that's a good question. So what I would probably recommend, if you really want to use Windows Task Scheduler, that you probably won't be able to easily, I'll say, use the virtual environment. You would have to create some sort of like batch file that first runs the command to start the virtual environment and then runs your Python file. You could do that. There's also libraries available for Python that will do exactly this for you. I would look into a library called Celery and Celery Beat, B-E-A-T. Those are packages or libraries available that are specifically designed for running things on a schedule. If you want to connect offline, we can probably dig a little bit deeper into that, but you'll have to get a little bit creative either way. The other option, and it's totally up to you, is if you're running on a box that's kind of isolated or you don't really care, you could also install the packages and the root of your Python installation and not worry about a virtual environment, but just know that can get messy. But we can reach out to me if you have more specific questions. I can definitely give you some tips based on our experience.
Yeah, and I was just gonna say, doing a little digging while you're going. I mean, it looks like you're gonna lose one side or the other. So you're not gonna be able to use the virtual environment if you want to schedule it. Otherwise, you're not gonna use Windows Task Scheduler. You're gonna probably like build a little app or something like with Flask or something like that. So
yeah. All right. Any other questions? All right.
Oh, wait. Nope. We do have another question. How can I ping a website multiple times to download the data from multiple pages?
So if we're talking about just any website or any API, I mean, it's essentially the same. We'll actually probably find an example that's close to what you're talking about when we get into automate the boring stuff. That's the third section, third module in here. You're going to use a loop essentially. You'll loop through and you'll make the same request to different websites several times. You'll probably have a list of URLs, et cetera, something like that. Without all the context, I'm just answering theoretically. But maybe when we get to the section where I loop through making a call multiple times, maybe that'll help. And if you want to clarify your question at that point, maybe I can answer.
And I was just going to add for a second, Cal. So I've done a lot of web scraping, so it could be one of the other two. So maybe you're hitting an actual like hosted API that you can actually get data from, which is what Kyle's mentioning. Maybe you're more referring to, you just see a website, you want to like turn that website into data from the page itself. That's a whole different area of like the web scraping. There are a lot of Python libraries built specifically for that. There's a lot of options. So depending on which route you're wanting to go, there's definitely ways you could do that.
Yep, definitely. All right, so let's move into module B. I almost said number B. That's not a number, is it? So this is stuff that we've also sort of kind of used as an example in prior sessions, but just as a review, one of the most important things you're probably going to have to do when you start doing things programmatically with the REST API and TSC is you're going to have to find the workbook, the data source, the schedule, the job, whatever it is you're looking for. You're going to have to be able to get it or filter for things that match specific criteria. So I want to cover some of the options that you have using both methods. And again, I think, in my opinion, this is one where the TSC wins hands down because there's just a lot that goes into it. So let me pull these up. And again, if you go into the folder for this module, I have examples for REST API and examples for TSC, and they're right next to each other. Let's give this a little more room for now. Okay, so if you look on the left here, with the simple request for getting workbooks, this is actually the same example that you saw on the other page. We sign in, we parse our token, we get our site LUID, et cetera, et cetera. We hit that URL and we get that list in XML that we saw before. One thing that I also want to call out here is, for simplicity's sake, you'll see that in each one of these files, I'm importing the same things over and over again. And there's copies of things in multiple folders. Don't do that if you're coding for real, if you're coding for work. It's always best to have things located in one place so that you don't have to, go and make sure, oh, did I update all 3 copies of this? I'm doing it for clarity's sake here, but I had to say that just in case anybody was going to call me out for it. So, moving on to a little bit more specific use case here. So on line 28, you can see I've got getting a workbook by its LUID. So this is another just GET request, and it actually is very, very similar to the request above it. Instead of ending at workbooks, I just include the workbook LUID at the end. And if I do that by a LUID, this is just a LUID of one of the workbooks on my site. You can see if I run line 50, let me run it again. Let's clear out this and clear that. I think I have something else. Yeah, let's not do that one. So you can see that I got this one, this is a little bit longer, but I get a response with all of the information about this workbook, like its web page URL, when was it updated, are tabs being shown, who's the owner, et cetera, et cetera. So if you were going in to find, let's say you needed to filter out workbooks that were older than a certain age, this is where you would start filtering these out. So looking at, let's continue down here and go to one that gets a little bit more complicated. So if I'm looking at filter workbooks by name, you can see that I start building these filters on the end of the request URL. And in this case, Tableau gives me a filter parameter, which is where when you see this question mark, and I give it the field I want to filter on, the operator, which in this case is equals, and check out the documentation is linked in the GitHub as well to read about all the different operators. But in this case, I just want where the name is the name. And comparing this over on the right-hand side, you can see that I've got filter workbooks by name a couple different ways. So the TSC has an approach for filtering called request options. It's noted in the documentation for TSC, but in my opinion, it's not documented very well. They talk about it. They don't give a very in-depth example of what it does and how it works. So I want to cover this with you guys because you also may not find great examples of this on the internet. So if we compare, I'm going to pull these up. Comparing lines 53 on the left and 40 on the right, I'm essentially doing the same thing, but instead of here where I have this filter and I've got a field and an operator and then a value, I'm essentially building that beforehand using this request options. So I'm creating something called request options. I'm adding a filter to it. And then you can see here, this is where it starts to look the same. I'm saying the field is name, the operator is equals, and this is the value that I want to filter on. And then when I go to get my workbooks, instead of server.workbooks.get with nothing, which would just give me everything, I pass in this request options. And now if I run this one, I should get a single result for the workbook that I asked for, which is 30 Rock. And that we can verify that because I called it with the name 30 Rock. So this is a situation where honestly, the call using TSC is longer than the API call because you have to build this request options object. This is not actually my favorite or even preferred way of doing it. There's another example. If anyone on here is familiar with a Python tool called Django, which you use to build APIs. Actually, the API that we use internally on our team at work is built off of Django. The TSC also allows you to filter things in a Django style way. So the big difference here is you can see I didn't create this request options object because it's kind of verbose and unnecessary in this case. But instead of calling server.workbooks.get, I called server.workbooks.filter and then said, I want the name to equal the workbook name. So this will give me the same results as the call before this. One thing to note, and it's in the documentation as well, the .filter method is not available for everything. Like I don't believe it's available, don't quote me on this, but I believe it's only available for workbooks, data sources, and possibly groups. I can't remember. But it's one that it is a lot easier to use. It's a lot less verbose, but it's not, it's not available everywhere. So my preferred method when when it's appropriate is to leave the filtering to Python. And this is something that I would say you can apply it outside of just Tableau. It's really good to know how to filter lists and iterables in Python. So let's take a look at this on the right, starting at line 82 and compare it with what I have on the left, which is I'm filtering data sources updated before a certain date. So in the REST API, you can see on my requests, boilerplate stuff up until line 87. And then I get to, again, my filter in the URL where I'm saying updated at, and in this case, my operator is LTE, which is less than or equal to, and then the date that I give it. On the right, you can see, again, boilerplate stuff getting into TSC. And I want to just return every data source that's available based on the site I'm signed into, and then filter it on my own that way. So one thing to keep in mind here, this is really nice. If you, for example, don't know what page of the results something might be on, or you need a very long list of results to comb through to get where you need to go. One thing to know is there's possible performance impacts here. So if you're on a site and you're querying every data source and the site has 10,000 data sources, it's going to take a little bit longer than if you tried to filter it, excuse me. So kind of use your discretion here. But in some cases, like I said, it's more worth it, more reliable, more readable, especially for someone who might come along later, to just filter it using Python. So how does that work? Looking on line 105. So Python has this built-in method called filtering, and called filter. Filter takes what's called a lambda function, and I'm not going to go too in-depth into that. All you really need to know is a lambda function is something that executes in place, and you don't need to define it. It's just you use them to do a very, very simple action, and they're disposed of that when they're done. So this filter reads as, if you just kind of ignore the lambda notation, what I'm saying is for everything in this list, so for X, every item, every X in this list of things, I want X's updated at property to be less than or equal to this date that I give it. And I'm saying that the source of those X's is this variable called all data sources. And when you use filter in Python, you wrap it around a list because technically, and again, this is a little more advanced, but technically a filter returns what's called a generator instead of a list itself. So we wrap it in list so that it gives me an actual list of items and not something that just says, this is what I would use to make a list. So don't worry about that for now. But you can see if I run this using this filter data sources and I put in a date of June 1st, so every data source in the site was edited before that. but you can see that I get back superstore data source, extract data source 2, and live data source. So that's kind of a rough, quick and dirty introduction to different ways to filter using the TSC and the REST API. Like I said, this is one of those where the TSC in some instances is a little bit more verbose than the REST API, but in my opinion is much easier to read, it's much more reliable, and it's much more consistent. Okay, so that brings us to the end of that module. So I'll pause again. Are there any questions, Zach?
There's been a question here about JSON. Actually, I'm not sure if we'll talk about this too much, but will you be covering or possibly a module that covers how to unwrap JSON data set where the data is wrapped within dictionaries?
Ooh, I might need a little bit more about the specific use case that you're talking about. So one thing to know is that what we refer to as JSON and what Python refers to as a dictionary are almost but not quite the same. So you'll a lot of times hear people use it interchangeably. Technically, JSON needs double quotes, whereas Python doesn't care and will accept single or double. So yeah, I maybe we can connect offline, or if you want to clarify your question a little bit. I'm just not sure exactly what you're going at.
Yeah, JSON can sometimes be a little tricky with Python, and I looked away for a second, but did you mention kind of like the JSON.loads and the .dump and all that stuff?
I didn't, so that's a good call out. So Python does have built-in support for reading and writing to JSON, either JSON to a string or a string to JSON, versus using the libraries called JSON. So there's functions called JSON.dumps, which I think is really dump s, and load s for load JSON from a string or dump JSON to a string. That might be part of what you're referring to. But again, if you clarify or if you want to connect offline, maybe we can look at your specific use case and get an answer. Any others, Zach, before I
That's it. That's all we got.
All right, let's move into some more fun stuff. So looping through actions. This is the part that I refer to as automate the boring stuff. So what do I want to do here? Like I mentioned, this is a kind of a real world scenario where, let's say a business user comes to you and says, I have some extracts that failed and I need you to rerun them right away. Here's a CSV with the details. How would you take that CSV and translate it into API calls or TSC calls to get that done? Now, I will say, when we get into the example here, there's like 4 things in the list, and it probably would be faster to just go and refresh them in the server. But, if you have something where, let's say you have 100 workbooks connected to a database, and that database was unavailable when a normal scheduled refresh was going to happen, then definitely this is the better way to refresh a bunch of things all at once. Let's get this out of here and get these and spread that out. All right, so jumping into looping through actions, what you'll notice right away, starting on line 13 on the left, 11 on the right is getting items from a CSV. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this since it's not really Tableau related, but it is identical. And essentially, this is how you read from a CSV. This is taking a CSV file with a path that I've given and turned it into a list of dictionaries. So that means that I can iterate or loop through each item, each row, if you want to think about it that way, in the CSV, and take some action based on the values in each column. So let me pull up the CSV just so we can get kind of a visual on what it looks like here. I know that helps me with stuff like this. So if I go into looping through actions and open this extract list.csv, and like I said, again, this is a very simple example, but just imagine you've got this big long list with hundreds of things in them or whatever, and you want to reloop them, or you want to just loop through and fire off a bunch of refreshes. So you can see here I've got a mix of data sources and workbooks. I've got the objects LUID, which is again that unique identifier, the LUID for the project, and the LUID for the site. Now, these are things that I could query. In this case, it was just easier to have them in the file so that the example didn't get too long. But I think we have seen in the prior examples how you can get the site ID when you sign in, get a project by name. So you can really start putting all these things together. So on the left-hand side, again, we're talking about request bodies, and this is another example of something really silly. So because the refresh endpoint for the REST API is a post, it requires a body. But if you look here, this body doesn't have anything in it. But if you don't send it a request body, you'll get an error. So that's just another one of those things that you kind of have to look when you're looking through the documentation for the REST API. Make sure you read really closely. There are going to be some things that are like, you need a body, it has to be blank, you need a body in multiple parts, you need this, you need that. So again, just kind of pointing to why the TSC kind of wins here. So I'm building a blank body, and then I am now moving into on line 32, actually reading from my CSV and looping through and taking action here. So you can see here online, let me turn on word wrap. On line 41, I'm starting my, on line 37, I'm turning my CSV into this Python list. And then I'm creating a blank response list here. And this is a best practice. Anytime, if you're going to do a for loop where you're adding things to a list or to a dictionary or whatever it might be, if I didn't have this line, for example, and I got into here and my for loop resulted in nothing, or there was nothing to add to this list, if I try to return it, then I would get an error. In this case, since I've said to Python, start this off as just an empty list. And then if my for loop results in nothing happening, then I'll just get an empty list instead of stopping the execution with an error. So just a best practice to call out while I'm there. So on line 41, you can see we started our loop. So I'm saying for item in extract list, and that essentially just each item represents a row in this CSV. I am doing my kind of boilerplate sign in, getting my token. And I'm saying here, by default, I'm setting a default. And I'm saying that my endpoint is workbooks. And then I'm saying, okay, but if the object type for this item is data sources, then we'll switch that to data sources. I could have done an if, else if, or an if, else. But this is, again, kind of a more Pythonic way of doing things, which is I will explicitly say it's this, and then I will give an explicit condition to change it instead of saying if else, where it's if it's one thing or anything else versus, and this is exactly what I want it to be. So again, just another best practice as we go along here. So within this for loop, I am making a post for each item. And kind of as we've seen similarly, I'm doing my URL, I'm passing in the site LUID from the individual items, I am putting in the appropriate endpoint. So if it's the URL needs to contain the word workbooks, if it's a workbook, data source is data source, et cetera, et cetera. And then the item, the LUID of the item itself. And then after I make that request, I'm appending the response to this responses list. So to put that all together, I run this, refresh a list of extracts from a CSV. I've given it a path to the CSV in here. This is just in my local folder. You'll see here that I have, and I'm going to talk about this either in the next section or next session. We have a string here that has an R in front of it, and that just means that it's a raw string. I don't want Tableau, or I don't want Python to try to do anything with it at all. Just read it as it is. If I take this out, what happens is Python sees backslashes as an escape character. And what that, you may have heard of that from other applications and things. Essentially what that means is Python sees a slash and says, oh, you're trying to tell me that the next character should be ignored. So what I would have to do to get actual slashes is double them up. So instead of doing that, I can throw an R in front of it, and then Python says, okay, these aren't escape characters anymore. So anyway, when I run this print from a list of extracts, then I get, I'm going to do all 4 of them. I get a response, a list of responses. And inside of these, you can see I have extract refresh jobs. So this is how I know that it sent the request to this server to refresh these extracts. And if I were to go in here and count each item, there are 4 of them. And the other thing that I might want to do, if you don't know, Python, or excuse me, the Tableau server, the REST API, the TSC, when written this way, the jobs are created asynchronously, which is a big word in the programming community that just means not in order or not right now. You can think about it that way. So essentially, this is sending a request to the Tableau server that says, hey, extract or refresh this extract for me when you can. Put it in queue, however you want to think about it there. So one thing I might want to do, unless I want to log in and actually check every single one, like did it refresh? Another thing that I can do is check the status of a job. And I can see that I'm doing that here on line 63. And it's just another endpoint that I pass a job ID to. So if I pass it the ID for one of these refreshes that I just submitted and hit OK, or hit run, excuse me, then I get an error. So in this case, the resource was not found, and that's probably my fault because I did move some stuff around last night. So, but again, this points out, this does give me, this does point out the utility of checking the status of the job, because Tableau just accepted the request from me, but it won't tell me. It won't tell me if the job fails unless I ask, or unless I am the owner of the content, and then I'll get that email that says, hey, your extract failed. Comparing these again with the TSC on the left is very similar. The method for getting the items out of the CSV is exactly the same. When I get to my for loop in here, only difference is, again, my boilerplate TSC stuff instead of the REST API, I do my sign in. And then you can see the difference is here. I'm saying if the object type is a workbook, I call server.workbooks get by ID, pass it that ID, and then I call refresh on that workbook's item by its ID. Same with the data source. These steps on line 41 and 45 essentially replace this. And then I've shown the same concept starting in line 51 of how to query the status of a job in TSC. And this would give me the same thing. It would give me results about, was there an error? What's the progress? Et cetera, et cetera. So that brings us to about 51 after. So I think this is probably, and this is about where I thought we would get today. So this is probably a good place to stop. I don't want to dive into the next session and go over or have to rush. So let's stop here. And I'm going to cover a couple additional things in the slides really quick, and then we'll reserve the final minutes here for Q&A. All right. So just some reminders. The next session is going to be on April the 27th. And this will be our part 5. This is the last session of part 1 of the TCI. So tell all your friends, make sure everybody comes. We'll continue on in the repo that I've been in today. We'll finish that out. We'll do some more wrap up and kind of making sure that all the concepts are covered. And we'll talk a little bit more about what Zach likes to call the art of the possible, which is we obviously just barely scratching the surface of what we can do here. And we'll talk about some of the crazy stuff that we've done at Chase, or some of the things that we've seen other people do using, call after call after call, or just getting really creative with things. So I look forward to sharing some of that stuff with you guys, because we've done some wacky stuff at Chase. And we'll talk about the future of the initiative, and as always, give away some prizes and make fun of each other. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, so real quick, just because we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to go through. We do have some questions, so we're going to do some questions, and then we also got a couple prizes like normal. So a couple things I'm going to kind of try my best to quickly answer. So there was, if you don't mind, Kyle, I'm going to share my screen for a second.
Yep, go ahead.
I think I can force you to stop. Beginner's guide. So One thing I will say, if you haven't joined us for the other sessions, is all these sessions every other week continue on where the last one left off. So in the beginning, in session one, they're very basic, talking about what Python is, things like that. What I would encourage you, and I think this answers a couple questions, is definitely go to datatheories.com/Tableau coders, or just remember datatheories.com. If you go to that, you'll see at the very top, there's a Tableau coders page. And this page has all the past events and the recordings from YouTube. So part 1, part 2, part 3, this is part 4 that will be on here as well. This also has the slides themselves and a link to the GitHub page, which we keep updated. So definitely check those out, go through those. Another thing that's good for beginners, I mentioned this in a previous session, is there's a book called Automate the Boring Stuff. It's free, it's online. It's a good book just to learn the basics of Python and what you can do with stuff with that stuff. I already said how you can access the recording. It'll be available likely in the next couple of days. All right, so a couple questions here real quick. Apologies if I missed it. I'm having problems running this locally due to the PAT library. Would I just pip install that, or is there more config required to run the code locally?
Yeah, okay, so Pat, actually, that is a little bit confusing. Pat isn't a library, it is a file that I've created to just holds my personal authentication token secret value so that I don't have to share it during screen share. So if you can just set that explicitly if you want. If you go into your dev site and create a Pat for yourself, you can just do it. You can just pass it in directly. I just abstracted it out again for privacy. So it's not a library, just something you generate on Tableau server.
All right, so we got that. I think you kind of went over this, but the high level 15-second version, Kyle, which is better to use, REST API or TSC?
TSC, all day long.
All right, we're going to keep it short. Is the TSC designed or up to date to perform all actions one is able to within the API, which is a good lead-in into our first giveaway question. So let's just ask the question. So Kyle has mentioned that full parity is not there between the REST API and the TSC library. What is, for a prize, put it in the group chat, what is an example of something that is not available in TSC?
We have another guess? We're almost close. List everything. Okay.
Kyle doesn't like the answers. Keep going.
List.
Add members to groups, list, response body. Anybody?
I want to give, so these answers are close, but they don't quite get there.
Get all.
Okay, then based on
get coffee for free.
Get coffee for free. That's definitely a winner. There we go. That's the one that I wanted.
All right.
Awab. So I think what you're going at is the one that I said, which is with the TSC, you can't filter directly by a project's ID. You have to create request options or use Python filtering or use another method to get it out.
We got 3 minutes. So Awab, put your email in there, please, and we'll cover that. And yeah, I seen your note, Kyle. I know that you didn't go through question number 2 that we rehearsed ahead of time. All right, we'll skip to question number 3. For another prize, which Python command does TSC use to handle sign in and sign out? Oh, I seen it.
Yep, MS got it.
MS got it again. Not only do you have a baby coming, you also got a prize from the.
You got a prize coming.
I mean, I don't know which one's bigger as far as like which one's a bigger deal, but congratulations. So MS, if you want to put your email, I know you've won before, but throw it in there so you've got it. So both of you, MS and Awab, make sure you put your emails before we wrap the session. Couple last questions here. Is the TSC designed, or we already just answered that one? So Any examples of putting a user interface to TSC, for example, Streamlit or Flask?
Yes, our whole internal application is kind of built off of an interface with an approval layer between this. I probably can't demo that just because it's internal to us, but we can probably mock up some screenshots for the final one as when we talk, or excuse me, for session 5 when we talk about the art of the possible, which I kind of already planned to do. But yes, the answer is definitely yes. We do that very heavily.
Okay. The book name was, I'll just put it out here, host, type to everybody. The book name was Automate the Boring Stuff. It's definitely a cool one. I like that.
And I think you put a link to it. If you go to the slides for session 1, I'm pretty sure there's a link to it in there.
Yeah, it was either 1 or 2.
1 or 2.
I want to say it was 2. But yeah, thanks for those that are putting that in there. Just because I've seen this earlier, Jeff corrected you, Kyle. So your issue when your code wouldn't run was you were passing in the workbook ID into the query job instead of the job ID. So that's why.
Oh, good. I copied. So, I must have grabbed the wrong thing. Thank you.
So we're gonna do this. Jeff, you get the 3rd prize because you called out Kyle being wrong and not doing the right thing. So Jeff, throw out your email. Awab, I don't know that I got yours either. So Jeff, Awab, if you could both put your emails there real quick so we can get you a prize.
Zach, can you imagine if you got a prize every time you corrected?
Every time I corrected you, I'd have so many prizes.
Thank you, MS. I like that. There's a Wob. Okay, we got a Wob. Jeff. There's Jeff.
All right, got him. All right. We are right there on the hour. So thanks everybody for joining. We'll see you in the final part. If baby comes early, it'll all be on Kyle's shoulders. Hopefully he doesn't disappoint. But other than that, thanks for attending. We appreciate you guys joining. Hopefully you learned some stuff. Check out datatheories.com/Tableau coders for past events. And we'll see you guys in 2 weeks for the last.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Have an awesome Wednesday.